The work of the Independent Review Commission on Sexual Assault has completed. They have submitted that report, and the Secretary has made his recommendations to the President. I think you also saw the President's statement as well on these recommendations. We've posted the report on our website. We've posted the Secretary's directive to the Department as well for all of you to see. Hopefully you've seen that by now. But I thought it was important for you to get a chance to talk to Ms. Rosenthal herself about their work, the scope of what they covered, and the recommendations that they made to the department. So I'm going to bring her up here for some time. She'll have, I think, some opening comments, then we'll go to questions. We've got about 30 minutes with Lynn, so we'll try to be mindful of that. Since she doesn't know you as well as I do, when you ask a question, please introduce yourself, who you are, where you're from, and if you could, please limit your follow-up so that we can get people through her, through many questions through her as possible. So, Lynn?
Good afternoon. I'm joined by Brigadier General retired Jim Schwenk, who was one of our legal experts on the IRC and is here to help answer questions. As I stand here today, I'm remembering when we announced this effort and when the Secretary stood up the IRC. And I said on that day that in reading stories from victims of sexual assault, I noted that they often felt that the purpose of the sexual assault was to make them feel like they didn't belong in the military, that they were someone who shouldn't be there. And I said on that day that this IRC was about ensuring them that they do belong in this military. I must say that finding, or my initial impressions, held true throughout our process, that the purpose of sexual assault and harassment is often to make someone feel like they don't belong. And you'll hear that as a recurring theme in our recommendations. The IRC has completed our work and delivered our recommendations to Secretary Austin. I want to recognize the leadership of the Secretary and President Biden in their commitment to ending sexual assault in the military. And I also want to thank General Milley, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, for his engagement in this process. And I want to acknowledge the support and cooperation of service leaders. We very much appreciated their willingness to come to the table and to have a dialogue, even when they didn't agree with some of our recommendations. I want to give you a guide to the report. I'm sure you haven't had a chance to read it. It's 299 pages. So I want to tell you what you're looking at. There's a short overview that highlights our recommendations. There's a longer summary report that details our findings. And then there are 4 reports from each line of effort. So there's a line of effort 1 on accountability, 2 on prevention, 3 on climate and culture, and 4 on victim care and support. So as much as I would love for you to read all 300 pages, you also could go directly to that report for that line of effort, and you would find everything you need there. And in fact, today, with some of your questions, I'll refer you directly to the report. As a part of our process, we met with over 600 individuals, including survivors, researchers, current and former service members, commanders, junior and senior enlisted members, and advocates working against sexual assault. I want to begin by reminding all of us about the scope of the problem. 20,000 service members experience sexual assault every year. Less than 8,000 report those sexual assaults. Less than 5,000 of those are unrestricted reports, meaning there's a victim has said that he or she wants a full investigation, and only a tiny fraction of those end up with any kind of action at all in the military justice system. So that's the chasm that we're talking about. And in fact, that chasm between the scope of the problem and the actions that are taken mirrors the chasm that we found between what senior leaders say about this problem and what junior enlisted members experience at the unit level. For decades, service leaders have said that there is no tolerance for sexual assault. But in practice, all too often, there is nothing but tolerance. As one senior enlisted officer told us in our listening sessions, 0 tolerance actually means 100% tolerance. This has resulted in broken trust between junior enlisted members and their commanders. We also found that the military justice system is not well equipped to handle sensitive crimes like sexual assault and domestic violence. These crimes are interpersonal in nature and have the potential to be re-traumatizing for victims as their cases move forward, so they need specialized care and handling. We note that there is a strong continuum between sexual harassment and sexual assault, and that there is a strong connection between unchecked sexual harassment when commanders take no action to address it and poor unit climates. We also found that the cyber domain can be as strong an influence on unit climate as real-time interactions, and that leaders are poorly equipped to deal with this ever-changing situation. And in fact, 30% of service women who experienced sexual harassment in the 2018 Workplace and Gender Relations Assessment Survey indicated that it took place online. We found, and this is critical because it ties to many of our recommendations, that there are critical deficiencies in the workforce, including lack of expertise across the board. This is a system that has operated for decades with inexperienced lawyers and investigators, collateral duty victim advocates, and a near total lack of prevention specialists. As just one example, there are thousands of collateral duty victim advocates, and what that means is that they have another job. They may be a mechanic or a logistics specialist or something, and then they are often voluntold to serve as their unit's victim advocate, but their job, what they're trained for, is actually something quite different. Now, I want to say that we met with many of these collateral duty victim advocates, and their passion is there, and their intent is there. But somebody who's doing this as a sort of part-time position without expertise and experience, although they receive training, this is not an appropriate way to respond to something as complicated as sexual assault. It's not appropriate. And we have recommendations to that effect. When you ask senior leaders what we should do about sexual assault, they almost uniformly say we have to get to the left of it. It's about prevention. But they don't really know what prevention is or how it's different from response. So as one sexual assault response coordinator told us, giving someone a water bottle with the hotline number on it is too late. It's not prevention. We found that prevention and response are often conflated. We also found that outdated social and gender norms contribute to a culture of hostility toward women in the services. And I would refer you to the LOE 3 report, which is quite detailed about this finding. And it includes a stunning chart about what sometimes happens to women when they come into male-dominated units. It is time for this to end. And I should also say that we found in our meetings on installations and with survivors and with junior enlisted members that this hostility extends to anyone who is seen as the other, as I talked about before, who doesn't belong. And for example, new RAND data tells us that gay men in the services experience sexual assault at 9 times the rate of other men. 9 times. We found that victims carry a heavy burden when they experience sexual assault. And I should say that this finding was a bit of a surprise to me. I've worked on this issue for years, and there's been a lot of focus on trying to care for victims. But what we found are great deficiencies in that care. Many cases are handled poorly with a near constant shuffling of personnel, so that's what I talked about before. For example, one survivor that we met with told us over the course of her case, she had 2 different prosecution teams, 4 different special victims counsel, and her victim advocate deployed right before the trial. So this kind of workforce where there are constant change of stations and constant moves, which is appropriate, for the way that the military needs to operate in most cases, is not appropriate for addressing a complex problem like sexual assault. Victims pay a high price for coming forward to report their assault. And again, this was a shocking and heartbreaking finding. Every survivor that we talked to who had made an unrestricted report, which means it would be fully investigated, told us they regretted it. Everyone. Most told us that they had contemplated or attempted suicide. And, you know, it's true for sexual assault victims, wherever we find sexual assault, that there's a high correlation with suicidal ideation. But what's different in the military is that 24-hour nature of life. If you're sexually harassed or sexually assaulted, you can't just leave. You can try to get your commander to follow protocol to have you transferred or to have the alleged offender transferred. But if that process isn't working well, you can't just leave because, in fact, it's a crime for you to leave. So what we note is different. And we often hear from military leaders that sexual assault is a problem in civilian society. And indeed it is, but it's different here. And I say that as someone who's worked with sexual assault victims for a long time on the civilian side. It is different when you're in a small unit where you live, eat, sleep, and play with the same people. And then there's an event and somebody's assaulted and people take sides. And generally because of rape myths and bias against victims, their side is not the one that's taken. And then they're bullied, ostracized, and that's when they start to feel suicidal because they feel trapped and they have no way out. I do want to say we believe that we can change this. This is not a hopeless situation. To address these deficiencies, we've made 28 recommendations and 54 sub-recommendations. So I just want to give you a few of the highlights. We've recommended shifting prosecution decisions to special victim prosecutors outside the chain of command, and we've, I think, talked about that before. There is a detailed explanation of how we envision this could work in the LOE1 report, and Jim Schwenk is also here to help answer questions. When it comes to prevention, leaders are the linchpin to success, but they have not been equipped to lead with key competencies rooted in primary prevention science. So when they say prevention is the solution, we would say, yes, it's the solution, and there's a science behind prevention, and leaders need to be equipped with that science. You can learn all about that in the LOE2 report, which in fact is a blueprint on exactly how the department and the services could implement a prevention workforce. This is an investment, but we think it's an investment worth making. We've made a series of recommendations to improve unit climate, including better methods to select, develop, and evaluate leaders, enhancements to the climate survey process, which I think we talked about here before, and greater transparency about disciplinary actions. The LOE3 report will tell you much more about those. We've made a series of recommendations addressing the handling of sexual assault and those crossover lines of effort. And we've made a series of recommendations to improve victim care and support, those dynamics I talked about earlier. Those recommendations include shifting sexual assault coordinators and victim advocates out of the command structure, largely eliminating collateral duty victim advocates, although you might need them in isolated deployed environments or on ships. This kind of independent advocacy where someone is 100% focused on the victim and reporting outside of the command structure is a best practice. It's what victims need, somebody 100% on their side. At the same time, those sexual assault response coordinators and victim advocates should continue to serve as key advisors to commanders. So the command responsibility remains taking care of their people, ensuring that victims are treated fairly, interrupting this pattern of bullying and ostracizing that victims often experience. They'll have on their team a victim advocate who's independent of command but is still their key advisor. We believe this is critical, and it mirrors the Fort Hood report. When survivors are believed and cared for by commanders, it is life-saving. We witnessed this and heard about it in our survivor interviews. It's not even so much the actual outcome of the case, but how the survivor was treated as the case moved forward. Many survivors dream their whole life of serving in the military. And even after their sexual assault, most wanted to stay and do their jobs. But they need care, understanding, and flexibility to do so. And they need to know that their commander has their back. And the recommendations in LOE4 describe that in great detail. Lastly, I wanted to just mention the need to highlight the response to domestic violence. Domestic violence and sexual assault are integrally tied together. 30% of active duty women have experienced violence from an intimate partner. That often includes sexual violence, and when sexual violence occurs in a domestic violence relationship, it is an indicator of increased lethality. So we need to be paying attention to these two problems together. I would just end by saying that commanders are essential to implementing all these recommendations. Most importantly, commanders are the key to improving unit climates, changing the culture, protecting victims from negative consequences of reporting sexual assault. And I want to say this clearly. The IRC rejects the notion that shifting legal decisions about charging someone with a crime or sending that case to trial diminishes the role of commanders. Instead, it enhances their role and places them in the lead of taking care of their people, which is their number one job, and creating climates of real no tolerance. That is their job. And so I'm happy to end there and take questions, and Jim will join me in those questions.
And I don't know about you, but I think this thing is too high.
Oh, I'm so used to that. You know, sometimes they bring me a little stool.
It is adjustable. It looks like it's on the secretary.
Oh, okay. Oh, well, is that what you were thinking?
Pencil mark for
Kirby,
me.
is that what you were thinking about the whole time?
It was on my mind for sure. It was too high
Can
when I
you
came
all
up.
see me now?
Is that better?
Sorry.
I
Do
would
you
have
want
done
me
it
to
while
start over?
I would have done it during your opening statement, but I didn't want to break the eloquence.
Oh, that's okay. No
All
problem.
right, Bob, we'll start with you.
Hi, I'm Bob Burns from Associated Press.
Yes, sir.
At the outset, you mentioned that military leaders do tolerate sexual assault despite what they say in public. I'm wondering which of your recommendations and in what way will they change that?
Well, first I should say we visited 6 installations and talked to a number more virtually, and in every single meeting with junior enlisted members, this emerged. The conversation was the same with every group we talked to across the services. So that's how we know that that's true. And our focus in LOE3 on really equipping and training leaders will make a difference. So selecting the right leaders, using qualitative and narrative feedback to select the right leaders, develop them on this particular issue with key competencies, and then evaluating them on how well they're doing. We also recommend a series of adjustments to the climate survey process. So I really want to commend the department and the work they're doing on climate surveys. There's a complex tool that measures climate across several different issues, and we would supplement that by a pulse survey or quick check of the unit to see what the climate is around sexual assault and sexual harassment specifically. And then when we can measure it, we can get commanders' assistance in addressing it.
Thank you.
Nick?
Nick Schifrin, PBS NewsHour. So, you know, off of Bob's question, and then I have one that's beyond the scope of the report. Off of Bob's question, to use the word tolerance is different, right? You talked about conflating prevention response. You talked about outdated gender norms. You talked about the structure being insufficient. But the word tolerate is an active verb. What do you account for commanders in your word tolerating sexual harassment and assault?
Well, I think there's two issues. And I want to say that we heard about toxic leaders. We didn't meet them. Many commanders that we talked to just didn't know what to do. They recognize that the problem is beyond their scope. So I want to say that from the onset. And I think there are two things that are happening. One is that sexual assault and harassment is not really tracked as a part of a readiness metric. So it's tracked in a lot of ways within DoD and the services, but not within the main effort. So that's what's key, is integrating. And the former commanders who served on our task force said that we have to integrate this into the main effort and track it as a part of readiness. So you have to pay as much attention to this as you do to your broken down vehicles, right? That's what this is about. Do you have your workforce in order? Have you done your climate surveys? How have you addressed deficiencies? Do you have people in your unit that are awaiting some sort of judiciary proceeding related to sexual harassment or sexual assault? So I think integrating it, and there's much more detail about that in LOE3, gets to that piece. And the other is, I think they just don't know what to do. You know, much of this is why you have to have an experienced workforce to advise commanders, because much of it is not intuitive, or it's hard to understand sometimes why victims do certain things that they do, and they do those things as a way to protect themselves, but it's hard to recognize that. They also are not trained in trauma. They don't understand the effects of trauma on the brain and how that makes people behave. So I think it's all about equipping them with those key competencies. So when you say tolerance is active, I don't necessarily believe in many cases that's hostile. I think it's all of that sort of toxic stew of not having the skills, not understanding it, not being properly trained, and I think they want to get better at it. The other piece I noted with these very well-intentioned commanders is that they when they step in, they want to take charge. And so then they start telling the victim everything that he or she should be doing, and that's not the right approach either. So that's why the reason we're hopeful is because those things can be addressed, right? Well-intended commanders who need more information, need stronger competencies, but also the integration into the main effort. If we can integrate this and think of it as part of the main effort, that will go a long way to addressing that tolerance.
And then beyond the scope of this report is, of course, the question of other felonies, right? So as you know, Senator Gillibrand's legislation calls for not just sexual assault and harassment, but other felonies, other crimes to be taken out of the chain of command. The chairman, the service secretaries have resisted that. Do you believe that in order to fix this problem, you actually need to go beyond just sexual assault and harassment felonies, that all felonies need to be taken out of the chain of
I just
command?
have to say that we didn't address that problem. That was beyond our scope. We were charged with addressing sexual assault and harassment, and where we broadened it to include domestic violence, it was because that's where our data led us. So we didn't assess the larger picture. And I don't know, Jim, if you want to add to that.
I'd just say from the LOE1 perspective, when we wrote the report, our report, and the other members, we briefed them on it and they voted on it. Our perspective was that, you want me over here? I'm getting stage directions from the back. Our perspective was that the problem, the sexual harassment, sexual assault problem, could be handled by the recommendations in this report. If those recommendations are implemented fully, they're integrated, because you can't just do prevention and not do climate. You know, you can't do climate and prevention and not do accountability. And you gotta back up what you say with what you do on how you take care of victims. So victim care and support. If you can do all that, we think that will, I mean, you're never gonna have zero, but it will greatly reduce and make a significant positive effect on the lives of the junior enlisted men and women in the military. We believed it, and that's why we wrote it the way we wrote it.
Hi, Ms. Rosenthal, when you were talking about the report, you said that the attacks, the assaults and the harassment were often done to make the victim feel like they did not belong in the military. In your work, did you also find that the response and the investigation by commanders and by units also left those victims feeling like they didn't belong?
Sometimes when commanders, what we often heard about was the commander was ignoring what was happening in the unit, which is that everybody was picking sides and often not the victim's side. And so the victim felt very isolated and alone, and that's when we identified that suicidal ideation as a part of that whole picture.
And then secondly, by taking the investigation and prosecution out of the chain of command, how do you envision like a permanent staff where they're not PCSing out, and how do you see that maybe cost being funded?
I'm going to turn to Jim again.
Okay, so that's the specialization within the military justice system and the military criminal investigative organizations. Right now, they have a mass of requirements, military justice being part of it, and except for the Navy on the military justice, the lawyer side, they do not have specialists in military justice and criminal law. So you get a bunch of young people that come in, well-intentioned, smart, aggressive, dynamic, no experience. We had several judges retired. We didn't talk to any active duty judges, but retired judges, military judges, who said that that the Achilles heel of military justice is inexperience. And so the whole specialization effort, which we wrote about in recommendation 1.4, is repeat the people in the military justice billets. If they have the ability, so it's not everybody that wants gets, if they have the ability and they have the interest, they apply, a board looks at them, they get selected, and then you have billets set aside where these people can repeat back and forth in military justice, so you develop that expertise. It's not going to be that many more billets. Because we already have a caseload and the prosecutors, defense counsel, et cetera, to handle that caseload. If the caseload for some reason went up significantly, then obviously you'd have to change it, but we don't anticipate it would. So it's not more billets, it's better use of those billets and keeping people, as you said, in the billets so they can gain that experience. I was fortunate to be on an LOE with 2 people, one of whom 15 years in the Dallas prosecution office. 15 years doing these kinds of cases. And you put that up against, you know, when I did them, 2 years. it's not fair. And so that's our recommendation. I hope that helped answer it.
I mean, the complexity of this problem requires a specialized response. And I think that's where we've kind of gone wrong on this, that we try to shoehorn it into existing structures, and it just requires more than that. And that means that resources will be required. These are investments in prevention and in victim care as well.
You mentioned the commanders being frustrated about not having the tools or, you know, the experience to be able to set their own programs. What specifically were their frustrations? Was it finding good training or, you know, standing up a good program? And what was their feedback about the idea that some of these things would no longer become their responsibility?
Well, I'll turn to Jim on the last one. To take the first part of your question, I think that they have very basic questions sometimes, like why did a victim stay in contact with someone who may have assaulted them? Why would that happen? That's all about that sort of effects of trauma on the brain. Why did a victim not want to be transferred? Why did she want to stay where maybe she felt she had some support? They didn't understand that. So they wanted to immediately activate an expedited transfer when the victim's saying, I need more time. And then there's this thing that's happened. I can't tell you how many times we heard check the block about everything in the system. Like, there are a lot of policies and there are a lot of structures. But what's happened in operations is that it's become just check, 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 have I done it? So we noted that because there's this anxiety about compliance, which there should be, but when someone sits down with a victim, the commander or a collateral duty victim advocate or whoever it may be, immediately they jump to, here are your reporting options. Do you want unrestricted, blah, blah, blah. When really what they need to do, somebody's in crisis, what they actually need to do is say, how are you doing? What do you need? How can I help you? And that would be the role of the professionalized victim advocates.
On the issue of the commanders and their reaction, we didn't run into a single commander that said, oh yes, please take these arrows out of my quiver and give them to some lawyer down the street. Instead, they said that in their view, they're responsible for everything their command does and does not do, and they therefore need every arrow they can get in the quiver to be able to handle problems as they arise. So we asked them the question from don't ask, don't tell days, if Congress legislated and did away with two of your quivers, or two of your arrows in your quiver, could you manage it? And every one of them said yes. So there might be an adverse effect, you know, within a unit here or there, but the commanders told us they could manage it. We also noted that the department, Congress and the department, have a long history of withholding arrows out of quivers in the Department of Defense. I mean, currently, if you're a lieutenant colonel and you think you're pretty cool and you're a battalion commander and you have a sexual assault problem, you are not taking, when you reach for that arrow of I'm going to take this to a court-martial, there's no arrow there. There's a little note that says go to your 06 Special Court-Martial Convening Authority and recommend that that person, he or she, send it to a court-martial. And you know, I'm sure from your experience, you know there are lots of other withholdings within the department, DUIs, officer cases, and that's just the way it is. Congress set up the whole system where the lieutenants, we were told over and over, where is this going to be won or lost, if you want to use that terminology. And it's at the deck plate level. It's at that small unit level. And so who's key? The NCOs, the small enlisted leaders. What kind of disciplinary authority has Congress given them? Zero. Okay, what kind of disciplinary authority has Congress given platoon commanders? Zero. And yet they're the key to solving this problem. So yes, the commanders did think that that there could be an adverse effect on good order and discipline. Yes, they thought it was manageable, and we considered that carefully along with the history of removing arrows out of the quivers.
Beyond the legal part, what I really mean is the idea that you would have a prevention specialist in your unit who would put together your SAPR program for you, bring it to the commander and say, sir, ma'am, I think these would be the best practices for us. Did they shudder at the idea that they wouldn't be the ones designing the training and doing all of that?
No, I don't think so at all. I think they would be welcome to have this expertise so that they could make this sort of stated commitment to prevention real. I mean, they worry about their people and their time commitments and being prepared for deployments. I mean, they worry about how all of that could work, but those are implementation issues. But the idea and concept that they would have more tools at their disposal, I believe they would welcome.
We got time for two more, so we'll go to the ones on the phone. Dan Segallen, PBS.
Thanks. I've got two questions. Victim advocates have told us that oftentimes sexual assaults will be reported to commanders, but then commanders will say, "Oh, that was consensual sex," and they don't report it. Or people will get assaulted and they report it to their NCO and they don't report it up. Did you encounter? Did you talk to a lot of people who said they had that experience? And what are your recommendations for that? And then also your report recommended that highly qualified experts be retained to see implementation through. Are you staying on in the Biden administration to oversee the implementation of your recommendations?
I'm not staying on. I didn't note that we stated that in our report, but we may have. But we hope that several of our HQEs who are real experts in this area will be staying on. I actually work at a Center for Domestic Violence and Child Abuse in Columbus, Ohio, and I'm due back there next week. But I certainly want to be available to the department for whatever they need. So all of us are very committed to following this through, and we hope that we will have HQEs that will remain, or that the department will employ other HQEs. I mean, we're not naive that this is a serious implementation effort. I think the department will move swiftly. We also urge them to move carefully, and they're going to need help to do that. So thank you for that question. About discouraging people from coming forward, you know, we didn't hear about circumstances quite that overt when a report was made to the commander, but certainly there's a lot of ways to discourage somebody from moving forward, like those kind of comments that you described. I mean, a commander who did that would be out of compliance with policy if said, let's just not take this forward. They have to refer it to an investigator. They have to follow the process. But certainly there's a lot of conversation, and this is where they repeat some of those rape myths and biases that they may not even be aware of, like, were you drinking, were you flirting, why did you stay out so late, all that kind of stuff. Those rape myths are what permeate people's views about how to address these problems. Those generally can be corrected with information.
And the last question today goes to Stephen Losey from military.com.
Hi, thank you very much. The Commission's report discussed the need for prevention specialists and the lack of people focused on prevention with the right kind of specialized skills. Can you talk a little bit more about precisely what sort of specialization the Pentagon is going to, or the military as a whole is going to need to bring in to try to get at this issue?
Oh, that's terrific. They need public health, social science, behavioral health experts, or some combination of that. So James Johnson, retired Major General Johnson, has laid out in LOE 2 a very careful plan that involves DOD creating a model workforce. What would that look like? I don't know. How many of them do we need? What sort of master's level public health experts do we need versus other kinds of researchers or specialists or evaluators? But they need some combination of those people. And then they need people to carry out the programming. And so DOD will develop, if this recommendation is adopted by the Secretary, they'll develop this prevention workforce model, and then we're asking the services to do manpower studies on how to implement that. We do believe in service flexibility, and that each environment is different and each service is different, but they all need public health experts. This is a science. It's not impossible. I think that's what we're excited about in LOE 2's report. It's not impossible to move the needle if we employ evidence-informed practices in public health science. There's a model called the socio-ecological model, where you work on the individual level, the relationship level, the community level, and the societal level. That's a standard public health model for creating change. We believe that's relevant here, and LOE 2 has a version of that model specific for the military.
Ma'am, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I would like to know if you have any closing thoughts.
Well, I would just say in closing again to repeat our appreciation to Secretary Austin for his faith in the IRC and for his leadership on this issue. And I would say that I think our courage, and I mean all of us, the department, Congress, the services, our courage has to match in addressing this issue the courage and tenacity that survivors show every day when they work to rebuild their lives. That's what this is all about. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Okay, some things to get through at the top here. And I want to start by reiterating the Secretary's gratitude for the professionalism and the hard work of every member of the Independent Review Commission. Certainly, Ms. Rosenthal's leadership and expertise proved critical here to producing this comprehensive report that we're going to be working through in the weeks and months ahead in terms of implementation and review and assessment of those recommendations. And the Secretary, again, is very, very grateful for all the effort that they put into it. And he maintains and stands by his goal to not be afraid to think creatively and to lead some change here. He has talked about this being a leadership issue, and he has made that clear throughout. And I think you can expect to see his personal involvement in leading this change going forward. So again, we offer our sincere gratitude to everybody on the IRC for everything that they did. Now, shifting gears, let me just give you an update on Afghanistan. Our mission in Afghanistan continues. We continue to execute a safe, orderly drawdown in accordance with the President's guidance for U.S. forces to be out of Afghanistan by the end of August. The safe, orderly drawdown enables us to maintain an ongoing diplomatic presence, support the Afghan people and the government, and prevent Afghanistan from once again becoming a safe haven for terrorism that threatens our homeland. As part of our ongoing drawdown process, the Secretary approved a plan today to transfer command authority over our mission in Afghanistan from General Scott Miller to General Frank McKenzie. We expect that transfer to be effected later this month. General Miller will remain in theater in coming weeks to prepare for and to complete the turnover of these duties and responsibilities to General McKenzie. Importantly, General McKenzie will retain all existing authorities as commander of U.S. forces in Afghanistan. He will continue to exercise authority over the conduct of any and all counterterrorism operations needed to protect the homeland from threats emanating out of Afghanistan. And he will lead U.S. efforts to develop options for the logistical, financial, and technical support to Afghan forces once our drawdown is complete. Now, as part of this new arrangement, the Secretary also approved the establishment of U.S. Forces Afghanistan Forward to be led by Navy Rear Admiral Peter Vasley. Rear Admiral Vasley's command will be based in Kabul and will be supported by Brigadier General Curtis Buzzard, who will lead the Defense Security Cooperation Management Office, Afghanistan. That office will be based in Qatar and will administer funding support for the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces, to include over-the-horizon aircraft maintenance support. This change in leadership structure and the turnover today of Bagram Air Base to the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces are key milestones in our drawdown process, reflecting a smaller U.S. force presence in Afghanistan. That presence will remain focused on four things over the course of the coming period. 1, protecting our diplomatic presence in the country. 2, supporting security requirements at Hamid Karzai International Airport. 3, continued advice and assistance to Afghan National Defense and Security Forces as appropriate. And 4, supporting our counterterrorism efforts. Now, again on schedule now, a different topic. Earlier today, Secretary Austin met with His Excellency Sirajuddin Mouradin, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Tajikistan, to reaffirm our strategic security partnership and to discuss the evolving security situation in the Central Asia region. Both leaders expressed their shared desire to continue close collaboration on issues such as counterterrorism, border security, and defense institution capacity building, and they reiterated their commitment to further promote the goal of a durable political settlement in Afghanistan. Moving to the European theater, Exercise Seabreeze continues as scheduled in the Black Sea. It is proving to be one of the most successful iterations in terms of scope, building capability among NATO allies and partners, and demonstrating our collective commitment to security in this region. This week, our ships began the at-sea phase of the exercise, rehearsing coordinated air, maritime, and land operations to build combined capability. The ships and aircraft are working together in international waters and airspace to refine multi-domain operations. Together with our partners and our allies, we continue to be transparent and truthful about these operations building trust and stability across Europe. I'd also like to highlight the Women, Peace, and Security Congressional Report signed by President Biden on Tuesday. The report summarizes U.S. government progress in implementing the U.S. Women, Peace, and Security Strategy. The report captures the important role of the Department of Defense in advancing gender equity and equality at home and abroad. As one of the world's largest employers, the department continues to make a concerted effort each year to model women, peace, and security by creating an enabling environment for women and gender minorities, both civilians and in uniform. As the U.S. officially commits to participating in the Generation Equality Forum, the DoD will build on our women, peace, and security initiatives to strengthen the linkages between gender equality and national security. Finally, I'm delighted to be able to announce that Secretary Austin will speak during the Global Emerging Technology Summit on July 13th. The summit, hosted by the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence, will also host Robert Work, former Deputy Secretary of Defense, as a moderator. And that's a lot of opening comments. So with that, we'll go to questions. Bob.
Yes, thanks, John. Yeah, there was a lot there on Afghanistan. I believe I heard you say that the goal now is to be out, if you use that word out, by the end of August. I don't believe I've heard that official timeline before. Is that a new goal? I mean, I thought it was September. I thought it was maybe this month. Why the end of August? And also, I didn't quite catch what you said about General Miller. Did you say he's staying for another week or something like that?
Yeah, so both questions. I mean, the president made it clear that he wanted the drawdown complete by early September. We believe we're going to be able to complete this process by the end of August. And that's what I was trying to state.
That process meaning the
meaning the completion of our drawdown by the end of August, and then we would transition to this new bilateral relationship with the security forces of Afghanistan. So the goal was early September. We believe we'll be able to make it by the end of August.
So troops will remain there until then.
I'm not going to get into specific numbers, but I mean, we believe we'll be able to get this wrapped up by the end of August. General Miller. So as I said, the general will be remaining in the theater for a number of weeks. I'd rather not get too specific about his specific travel plans, but he'll stay out there for another couple of weeks or so to help affect this transition of command authority from himself to General McKenzie. So he's probably going to be, I suspect he'll be traveling around as he gets ready to turn over these responsibilities. He'll be probably traveling in the theater and even perhaps outside Afghanistan as he does this. But the idea is to have him remain there to affect all the turnover of responsibilities and make preparations for General McKenzie to assume those responsibilities.
Okay, sorry. So General Miller will remain the commander for at least a couple more weeks.
Correct.
He'll be in and out of Afghanistan.
Yes.
And he's there right now?
I'm not going to get into his daily travel. I'd rather not do that. I think you can understand why. But I would expect that over the next couple of weeks, he will be traveling probably about Afghanistan and perhaps about the theater as he begins to prepare the turnover of his responsibilities to General McKenzie. But yes, he is still in command.
Thank you.
Yeah. The plan, I tried to make clear in my opening that the Secretary approved today this plan to transfer authority. The authority has not transferred today. It's going to take a couple of weeks or so.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, just
Go
a
ahead,
clarification, sir. And will he be setting up the U.S. Forces Afghanistan and the U.S. Forces Afghanistan forward, or will that be something that General McKenzie will do?
Well, the Secretary approved the establishment of U.S. Forces Afghanistan forward, which will be led by Rear Admiral Vasily. So he's approved the establishment of that new command, and now they're in the process of getting it stood up. Tara.
Thanks, John. Can you kind of take a step back and talk about the significance of the closure of Bagram, the last operating U.S. base in Afghanistan, and is this the end of a chapter?
It's I wouldn't describe it as the end of a chapter, Tara. I mean, obviously it's a big air base that we've been using for 20 years, but it was important because of the effort that we were expending in Afghanistan, the size of the force that we once had in Afghanistan. I mean, Bagram was a key hub for air support for everything that we were doing over there for the last 20 years, and not just us, but our NATO partners as well. And we're beginning, the mission continues, but it is going to transition eventually to a completely different kind of bilateral relationship with Afghanistan. And we, as part of the drawdown process, eventually we knew that was one of the bases that would have to be turned over to the Afghans. I don't think it should come as any surprise to you that it was one of the last to be done. We still have facilities in Kabul because it's so close to Kabul and because it has such robust air capability. But we don't need that kind of capability right now, so it made sense for it to be the one to be turned over at this point in the process.
But it was the last U.S. operating base besides the presence, I guess, that has now shifted to Kabul.
Right. I mean, but that was, again, it was necessary for the kinds of capabilities we had in country and the scope of the missions that we were performing. That those missions will change now as we work our way through the summer. They'll continue to change. And as I said in the opening statement, I mean, this arrangement, including the leadership arrangement I talked about, including the closure of Bagram, is in keeping with having a smaller force in Afghanistan.
For the aircraft that departed Bagram, are they now out of the country, or do we still have air assets in Kabul to support the remaining footprint?
I think, without getting into too much specificity, I think there are some aviation elements that we retain at the airport, but in terms of the kinds of strike capabilities that I think you're talking about, those are no longer in Afghanistan. I won't detail where every aircraft has gone, but I would remind, as we said this before, we have a robust footprint in the region, even outside Afghanistan, and we still have the capability to conduct over-the-horizon missions as necessary for counterterrorism.
And just one last for now. Once we hit the end of August and troops have completed the departure, will there be any sort of enduring over-the-horizon support for Afghan forces? Will there still be an authority for U.S. forces to conduct air support for Afghan forces if they are come in contact with the Taliban?
I don't want to get that far ahead of our process. What I can tell you now is that those authorities still exist. And General Miller still has those authorities. And as I said in my comments, when he transfers command authority to General McKenzie will retain those same authorities.
Okay.
Let me go to somebody on the phone there. There's quite a few. Carla?
Hey, John, thanks for doing this. Just some housekeeping. First let's talk about Syria real quick for my Persian service. Can you give us any more details? Are you any closer to confirming that KH or some other specific Iranian-backed militia were responsible for those rocket attacks in Syria? And then I have a follow on Afghanistan.
I mean, without getting into specific attribution, I think, as we said at the time, that we were confident that those structures, those facilities, were being used by Iran-backed militias to attack our people, our facilities, and our Iraqi partners, and we're confident in that. I'm not going to get into specific attribution beyond that right now.
Okay, and then on Afghanistan, Jen Psaki, the White House spokeswoman, she said that Austin was going to be making a statement later today. Is Secretary Austin going to be doing that in front of the camera? Is that just going to be a written statement that you guys push out to us? And for us reporters, what's left now? Because Bagram was such a huge piece of the puzzle of the U.S. troop withdrawal. So what exactly is left to do in these next few weeks?
The statement that Ms. Psaki is referring to is the one that I read at the top of this briefing, and without, we want to be very careful here. We're still conducting this safe, orderly, and deliberate drawdown. So as for what's where and who's where, I'm going to be very careful. But clearly, with the closure of Bagram, the locus of our efforts are in and around Kabul at this point. But I won't go into any more detail beyond that. Nick.
A couple of them, then just very brief follow-up. Again, maybe you won't want to confirm this, but just can you confirm there are no U.S. troops in Afghanistan outside of Kabul?
I'm not going to get into their specific location, Nick.
So a couple things on the maintenance that we've been talking about and the airport. Is there an agreement to maintain Afghan helicopters outside of Afghanistan, whether that's partially in the Gulf or perhaps north of Afghanistan, and how to have the personnel who can do that?
Again, I think General Buzzard is going to be working on this as in concert with General McKenzie on the kind of technical, financial, and maintenance support that we're going to be able to provide the Afghans. We are committed to doing that. It will obviously be in an over-the-horizon capacity, and the details are still being worked out.
Airport. Are the details still being worked out with Turkey, exactly what they need from the U.S., or in fact maybe nothing from the U.S., and how that transition will take place?
We're still in talks with Turkey about what the security footprint's going to end up looking like at the airport. I will only say, as I said before, we all recognize that security there is going to be critical to being able to maintain a diplomatic presence in Afghanistan.
Regardless of who has the authority, whether it's Vasely, whether it's Miller, whether it's McKenzie, has there been a decision made on what would require an airstrike from over the horizon? Somebody about to attack the embassy, somebody about to attack the airport, somebody about to attack the palace in Kabul. Has that decision been made?
I'm not going to get into rules of engagement, Nick, and we don't do that. But we will retain over-the-horizon counterterrorism capabilities, as I said at the outset. Certainly, any threats emanating from Afghanistan to our homeland, we're going to be able to retain the ability to counter those threats. And as I said to Tara, all the other authorities that General Miller has right now, for instance, in helping defend Afghan national security forces, still exists. And those authorities will transfer to General McKenzie in the coming weeks, and he'll have those. And I won't really get beyond that. I don't think it's helpful to speculate, A, for how long, and B, exactly how they're going to be executed.
And just to ask a question kind of that Afghan government officials are asking, how is it possible at this point when we are essentially only in Kabul, have closed Bagram, we are so close to kind of an announcement, if you will, about the end of the U.S. mission, that some of these other details haven't been worked out already?
They are actively being worked right now, Nick. This is complicated stuff, and it's more important for us to do this right and to make sure that the solutions are sustainable over time than it is to just slap a solution on it. And we're confident that in working in concert with our colleagues at the State Department, we're confident that we're going to get there. I want to remind, because sometimes I think it's too easy for us to forget, we already possess capabilities, over-the-horizon capabilities, particularly when it comes to counterterrorism. You've heard the Secretary said there's not a scrap of earth that we can't hit if we really want to. You saw it play out over last weekend, didn't you? With manned aircraft strikes in Iraq and in Syria. We have a capability. And so we're going to pursue that. We also want to pursue options. One of the things we're always after, Nick, is more options. And so clearly we're going to be discussing this again with our State Department colleagues, with countries in the region to see what the possibilities for additional options are. Let me go to Idris from Reuters.
Hey, John. Thanks for doing this. There are obviously still a lot of things that require agreements or decisions, that from the basing in nearby countries to where the SIVs go, how many specific troops will stay in Afghanistan, a bunch of things. And I was just wondering, is the Secretary confident that all those things can be agreed and decided upon before the withdrawal is complete, or does he believe many of those things, or at least some of those things, will need to be decided or agreed upon post September?
Obviously, we'd like to get decisions on many of these initiatives as soon as possible. And you're seeing a lot of concerted effort by the administration and certainly by the Secretary to that end. He's in constant touch with General McKenzie, of course, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Milley, about the over-the-horizon support for the Afghan National Security Forces. He's in constant touch with the State Department and Secretary Blinken about what we're doing on the special immigrant visa program, as well as on working with other nations about options there as well for over-the-horizon support. So we're working this very, very hard. What he wants to do, as I said to Nick, he wants to make sure that we get this right and get it done in a sustainable way, rather than try to rush to a solution that won't be sustainable over the long term. So there's a sense of urgency here, but just as importantly, in fact, maybe even more importantly, there's a sense of propriety, and that's how the Secretary is approaching this.
Can I ask a quick follow-up?
Sure.
I just really want to confirm what you were telling Carla. So the U.S. military still has the authority to protect Afghan forces until the drawdown is complete. After that is unclear. Is that correct?
I don't want to get to the prepositional phrase you ended at the last of your question in terms of timing. What I will tell you is that those authorities still exist. General Miller has them still, and when he transfers authority over U.S. forces in Afghanistan to General McKenzie will retain those authorities. Stephen Lucy, military.com.
Hi, thank you. Earlier this week, the news broke about the South Dakota National Guard to the Mexican border being funded by $1 million donation by a private citizen. Does the DoD have any thoughts about the appropriateness of funding this mission with a private donation? Do you have any concerns that this might suggest the National Guard is effectively for hire?
We actually have no additional information or a comment to make on Governor Noem's decision. As I understand it, the South Dakota National Guard is now working with the Texas National Guard to coordinate mission specifics and dates, and I would leave it to the governor of South Dakota to speak more to this decision of hers. Janie.
Thank you, John. On the reduction of the U.S. excuse me, on the reduction of the U.S. forces in Korea, South Korea, the U.S. Congress proposed the legislation to restrict on the reduction of U.S. forces in South Korea. It will be reduced from 28,500 to 22,000. What is the DoD's position on this proposal that the U.S. FK cannot be reduced below 22,000?
We're not going to comment on proposed legislation, Janie. That's a general rule of thumb. So I won't comment specifically on that. The only thing I would say is, well, two things. One, if there's a law passed that makes such a restriction, we're going to obey the law. Number two, we remain fully committed to our alliance with South Korea. And part of that commitment means having appropriate readiness on the peninsula, as we say, ready to fight tonight, and that means having appropriate force levels. And what the Secretary's focused on is making sure that we are ready in all respects, to meet our security requirements to the people of South Korea. As you know, there's a global force posture review ongoing. We expect that work to continue through the summer, and I have no doubt that one of the things they'll be looking at as they look at the Indo-Pacific region is our presence on the peninsula and whether we think that that's appropriately resourced to our strategy and to the threats and challenges that are there.
Why the defense budget cannot use this for? I mean, defense budget for 2010.
Why can't the defense budget use what?
These reductions for the South Koreans. Usually, Congress they said the defense budget cannot use for the reductions of U.S. FK.
Look, I'm not a parliamentary expert here, so I don't. I think if I'm understanding your question, you're asking why can't they use the NDAA to put this idea in it? If that's your question, I don't know the answer to that. It's probably better left to somebody who's more educated on this process than me. But again, we obey the law, and we're not going to comment on proposed legislation. But when proposed legislation becomes law, we obey that law. Separate and distinct from that, our focus is on making sure we can meet our security requirements and commitments on the peninsula, and that's where the Secretary's head is. And again, our Global Force Posture Review will be a chance for us to take a look at resourcing on the peninsula and whether we have that right, given the threats, given the challenges, and given the strategy that we want to pursue in the Indo-Pacific region.
Does this number include the regular rotation of troops, or?
Again, I'm not going to talk about the proposed legislation, the details. We have, I think 28,500 right now, right?
22 to 22,000, so there will be 6,500.
You're asking if it gets reduced, what that would look like? Again, that's very speculative right now. We're not in a position to talk about that with any great detail.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Dan Segallen.
Is General Miller going to Tajikistan?
I'm not going to, Dan, I'm not going to talk about General Miller's travel over the next couple of weeks. I think you can all understand why we wouldn't do that. As I said, he remains in command. He will remain in command as he begins to prepare the turnover responsibilities to General McKenzie. Some of that turnover process will likely include some travel on his behalf, but we're not going to get ahead of that travel or speak to the details of it.
Okay.
Yeah, Lucas.
John, the New York Post is reporting that the Defense Department gave about $42 million to the Echo Health Alliance, the nonprofit that funneled money to the Wuhan Institute of Virology for coronavirus research, and that included research on countering biological weapons. Can you confirm that?
Just saw the story. I'll take the question.
One more, just to follow. Do you know where former Defense Secretary Rumsfeld will be buried?
I will leave that discussion to the family. It's really that's for the family to speak to. And again, our thoughts and prayers go out to the former Secretary Rumsfeld's family, loved ones, and friends. We will respect their privacy and their ability to speak to how they want to handle that. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Two questions, both on Turkey. One, Turkey rejects and regrets that U.S. placed Ankara in the list of countries using child soldiers in armed conflicts. And very brief from the statement, striking example of hypocrisy, double standards, as the U.S. openly aids, provides weapons to PKK-YPG that forcibly recruits children, says Turkey. And what is your response? And then I'll go ahead and ask another thing.
Well, I can make this one easy. That's really a question better put to my State Department colleagues, not for the Defense Department. What's your second question?
Thank you so much. Tomorrow, Turkey's President Erdogan will be launching construction of a controversial canal, a man-made artificial canal, which is called Canal Istanbul. Will there be an impact on the access of warships? There were discussions over this, and how does Pentagon view it?
I have no idea. I'll tell you what, I'll take the question. I'm not aware of this canal or where it is or what kind of impact it might have, so let me ask my guys.
It's an agenda for Turkey for sure, but there are other views, as I said.
I really don't know, ma'am. I'll take the question and we'll see if we can get you a better answer. Sorry about that. Yeah.
I have two questions, and one is on the basic question on Afghanistan. So when did this withdrawal started? Or was it on May 1st, or is it a couple of days earlier in the end of April? Do you have a specific official date of the start of this withdrawal process?
Look, I couldn't point to a date on the calendar. The president announced his decision in mid-April, and I think you heard me say, even before May 1st, that we had begun the drawdown process and that some equipment had already moved before May 1st. The president's direction was to begin it by May 1st, and we were able to begin it before May 1st. But I can't point to a specific day on the calendar. I know that it began before May 1st.
And the second question is, there has been a report that the United States military and the Japanese self-defense force has been conducting a joint exercise on the Taiwan crisis. And can you confirm this report?
We are yes, conducting a bilateral exercise with Japan. I'm not going to talk about the specific exercise scenarios. We constantly look for opportunities to prepare, to train, and to improve our interoperability and test our combined capabilities. But I won't speak to specific exercise scenarios. Bob.
John, following up on my original question about August, you say that the plan is to be out by the end of August. Is that the same as saying that the plan is to keep forces there until the end of August?
I don't want to parse the words too much, Bob. As I said at the outset, the President's direction was to be out by early September. We believe that we'll be able to complete the drawdown process by the end of August. And that's our best estimate right now, and that's what we're driving towards, is to be complete the drawdown process by the end of August. There's a lot that goes into the drawdown process. I won't speak to specific numbers of troops at any one particular time, but what we want to get to by the end of August is that level of force presence that's required to protect our diplomatic presence there. And that's going to be the focus of that presence when we get to that point.
So it's been a moving target. By definition, you said it was going to be September now. So could it be the end of July?
I would not want to speculate, but right now we believe that we can complete this process by the end of August.
Just to follow up to Bob's question, has the Pentagon been ordered to speed up the withdrawal from Afghanistan?
There's been no orders to speed up.
It sounds like it is. It was September, now it's August. How should we infer that then?
It isn't that big of a difference. Early September to the end of August is not a dramatic difference, Lucas. And as I said, we believe we can be done by then.
Was that because some people were uncomfortable with the 9/11 date? Is that why the date has changed?
There's no change to date. We have to be out by early September. The President said by early September.
Well, you said no change of date. We're going from September to the end of August. That sounds like a change.
It's a change of month. I mean, it's not a change of date, and it's based on our assessment of progress to date. And we're trying to be as transparent about it as we can be. I can't give you a date certain in August, but that we believe we'll be able to complete the process by the end of August.
The withdrawal is not being sped up.
The withdrawal is not being sped up. No.
John, as a follow-up on that, I mean, fundamentally, are we talking about the airport then? Like, if we're, if you say by the end of August, the focus is on diplomats. Right now, we've just closed Bagram. What is left between Bagram and the embassy? It seems like we're talking about the airport, right?
I think there's a lot of there's security at the airport is still a concern. Let me just put it that way. And of course, we are still obviously going to be concerned with what the right presence is to protect our diplomatic presence there. And there's still some analytical work being done to this, and again, I won't get into more detail than that. Tara.
Follow up on basing. So this week the Secretary has met with the foreign ministers of both Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. Are those the two primary candidates for maybe a nearby base for operating and continuing that over the horizon in Afghanistan?
I think it's safe to assume that that we, in concert with our State Department colleagues, are talking to neighboring nations and trying to explore over the horizon opportunities that might exist there. And I'll let those two nations speak for themselves, but I think it's safe to assume we are talking to a range of neighboring nations about the possibilities.
And specific to Uzbekistan, it's also almost 20 years to the day that U.S. forces first arrived at K2 in response to the September 11th attacks. And many of them subsequently became very sick or died because of the toxic exposure there. Has that been brought up in discussions? If U.S. forces are sent back to Uzbekistan, would K2 be a location, or would there need to be some cleanup there for that to ever be a candidate base?
Let's not get ahead of process here. No decisions have been made. I don't think that's helpful to speculate. We are mindful, the Secretary's mindful of the toxic exposure caused by K2. and he has talked about this on more than one occasion with Secretary McDonough at the VA. We know, all of us know, that this has to be taken seriously, and that we have responsibilities to the service members who are thus affected. That's never far from our minds. But I won't get into specifics about what facilities might be used in what countries. We're just not at that point right now, Tara. I still got some on the phone here. Tony Capaccio. Oh, maybe Tony's not
John,
there.
Jen, can you hear me?
Thought I got
John?
away with it.
Okay.
I got you.
Two quick ones. At what point will the Pentagon be able to outline in some broad scale what this over-the-horizon capability is going to consist of, so that it's not just seen as some mythical capability that you're laying out?
There's nothing mythical about it, Tony. It exists. It's tangible. All of you have seen it. We have those capabilities. We want to have more options for those capabilities, clearly, and that's why we're having discussions with neighboring nations as possibilities there. There's nothing mythical about that. It's hard spade work to make sure that we have as many options and capabilities available to us as possible. As for the when, as I said earlier, we're working on this very hard. The Secretary certainly understands the importance of continuing the efforts on this, getting it right and getting it done in a sustainable way, and that's what he's focused on. What I can assure you, without pointing to a date on the calendar, is that when we're able to speak to the options that are available to us, we'll be able to do that. But obviously, if we're talking about doing this in a foreign nation, that foreign nation also has equities, also has to have decision space, and also should be allowed to speak for those equities and for those responsibilities. And so we're going to respect that process as well.
Okay, I have a quick one on yesterday. The Air Force was allowed to award a $2 billion contract to Raytheon for a new nuclear cruise missile. My question is this: why award a contract when you're just starting this new nuclear posture review?
The LSRO system that you're talking about, that's a key component of the modernized air leg of the triad, and you've heard the Secretary talk about his belief that the nuclear triad does remain a bedrock of our national defense. The Air Force contract action that you're talking about continues the engineering and the development activities for the LRSO program. The budget, that 22 budget request, supports our efforts to modernize the nuclear triad. It funds all critical nuclear modernization requirements and help ensure that modern replacements will be available before aging systems reach the end of their extended service lives. So we're going to continue to look at these issues in the context of both the nuclear posture review and the budget process. And as we continue with nuclear modernization, we're going to continually review ongoing programs to assess their performance, schedule risks, and projected costs, seeking to find the right balance of maintaining the necessary nuclear capabilities with cost-effective solutions.
Last one.
I think Tony might have had one objection. Go ahead, Tony.
You've got a review just starting, and you're obligating $2 billion. What if the review comes out and says, hey, we don't need this missile? Then you're on the hook to cancel the contract.
I don't want to get ahead of the review process, Tony, but as I said, we're going to be informed by both the nuclear posture review and the budget process. The budget process also has to be respected, and I think we want to make sure that that as we move forward, it's moving forward in both lanes. And again, I don't know that it would be helpful to speculate about the outcome there, but it's being reviewed and looked at in the context of both of those processes in parallel.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, John. Do you have any information about the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un lose weight?
No, I do not. Ma'am?
Thank you. Apologies if you've already covered this, but as the concerns about the Delta variant rise in the general population, has there been any additional concerns about that spreading within the military?
I mean, we're watching the science very closely. I don't have an update for you. We had a briefing here with COVID experts just the other day on Wednesday. I couldn't add to their expertise clearly, but we're watching the science on this very, very closely. Our information tells us that the vaccines that we're administering are safe and effective. And again, we continue to encourage everybody inside DoD to get vaccinated.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you.